All right. Thank you very much, Jets. Hi, everyone. My name is Dina. I'm a novelist, writer, and filmmaker. Sorry, novelist, photographer, and filmmaker. I'm currently in the midst of writing my novels as well as working on my debut film. Last year, I kind of presented on a certain uh, how I was writing, editing, and world building on Vim / NeoVim. This year, I want to talk about how I built my second brain on Vim, simply because, and I think that has kind of contributed to uh, this this productivity increase that that I kind of referred to earlier with Prime and TJ. So, uh, so for those of you who don't know me,
Hey
sorry.
Dina,
Uh,
can you click hide on the little notification for
oh, right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that.
awesome,
Now,
thanks. No worries.
all right. Okay. So the thing is, besides being all of these, doing multiple roles at the moment, I also like playing around with open source software. That's a really nice way of saying I do dumb shit on the computer, right? And I'm going to tell you guys a very quick story of how the very first dumb thing I ever did on a computer was this. This was I think this was a NEC PC 9000 from the early or late 80s, and this was my dad's first kind of computer back then. The first time I kind of walked in, I imagined movie sequences, and I was like typing away at the keyboard until I broke the keyboard eventually. So I guess I have like a history of doing dumb shit on the computer, and that kind of maybe explains why I would move from the standard toolkits that writers have to Vim. Um, but and give me a second. I just want to make sure I get my notes right. So last year, when I was here, I presented my writing workflow. So I'm going to do a very quick recap. This is me writing, editing, and world building on NeoVim. I'm going to speed this up so that you guys have. This is from last year, so I'm just going to repeat this for uh, the the convenience of people who were there last year. Uh, Essentially, at that point in time, I was using splits. This was the work in progress novel back then. Again, telescope, TJ. I've since since discovering of telescope, it's just been kind of mind blowing. And I remember saying last year I couldn't believe something like this even existed for us writers, and that I probably when I was old that I would even have some access to this sort of technology. I'm so sorry about the video buffering because we are in the midst of a cyclone right now, so the internet is a little spottier than usual. Last year also, I also showed how I was using Vim. I mean, I wanted to one of my motivations was because I was writing a lot on my phone from a very young age, like texting myself and so on and so forth. I wanted a writing environment that was platform and device independent. And with Vim, I was able to kind of achieve that. And this is essentially the first time I used version control on Vim on my phone. This was basically Termux running Vim back then. This was about a year and a half ago. Since then, I've switched over to Termux from the F-Droid marketplace as opposed to the Google Play Store, and F-Droid has NeoVim 0.8, uh, which has made ensuring my NeoVim goes. My NeoVim config is the same, despite whatever device I may be on. So since then, I've also, like I mentioned earlier, I've started working on my first film, and when I got the gig, as it were, around January earlier this year, one of the first questions that I asked myself was, okay, to what extent can I push Vim? And the first test for that answer, or the test first, sorry, the first test for that question was, can I write the film treatment on Vim? And turns out I could. This is NeoVim writing using org mode. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is obviously NeoVim itself. On the right-hand side, it's Zatura, basically doing a live preview of the film treatment as I was writing it. And this is basically the file that went to my producer before I got the go-ahead to essentially do the project. And that's how I basically got started on the film. Now, once you get started, once you basically get the approval from your producer and the go-ahead and the funding, the next obstacle that you have to clear is, can I write my script on Vim? And it turns out the answer for that also is yes, because the problem with writing for screenwriting software rather, Final Draft and Slug and such, are fairly expensive. And for those of us who are making films outside of the Hollywood / mainstream films system, it's fairly unaffordable. So the first question that I had to answer was, is there a way for me to write screenplays that doesn't involve me having to go into Microsoft Word and having to like format it in that specific industry specific guidelines that you are supposed to follow? Thankfully, there was a plain text standard called Fountain, and Fountain essentially allowed, Fountain being a markup language, essentially allowed for a fairly easy plain text way of writing screenplay that didn't involve having to format the screenplay as I would have to if I was working on Word. Once again, Final Draft is fairly unaffordable to us, right? So that is the reason I had to kind of move into Fountain. And turns out Fountain also had a Vim plugin. It's called Vim Fountain. So this is basically the screenplay, the script rather. The film is a documentary, so not a screenplay, it's a script. But essentially, this was the script that I wrote before the primary photography started around March. And one cool part of this is because I was working with a co-writer, an anthropologist who is based in a different country. And because I was adopting, plain text and a text editor to write, one of the things that I wasn't sure of was if my co-writer would be comfortable writing plain text and having to kind of adopt markup language and so on and so forth. So essentially, I spent about half a day teaching her Git and showing her how to install VS Code. I couldn't ask her to go through Vim, let's be honest, right? So it was VS Code, and VS Code had an extension for Fountain. And once that obstacle was cleared, essentially we both of us co-wrote the script over Git using Fountain, and that's what you're looking at right now. Essentially, the right-hand side is Zatura live previewing or live rendering the screenplay. What else have I been doing? The other one is I have been moving my, like I said, like my productivity has gone through the roof, and this is essentially LaTeX / NeoVim. I am using TMax here. I'm going to just play that again so that it's not too fast. Let me just slow that down a bit. Sorry about that. Give me a moment. Let me just slow this down so that you guys have a sense of what exactly is going on. And I'm just going to pause this here. Right. So essentially, it's TMax. I'm using, I have a TMax session called writing, and under that session, I have a bunch of different windows which allows me to switch between different contexts. As I said, I'm currently working on 3 different novels, 2 different short stories, and this screenplay or the script for the film is also being refined while I'm getting it ready for release as well, because I have to get the script ready in time for the film to be out as well. So essentially, TMax allows for that. And the thing is, we are writers. I mean, I am a writer, right? And the thing is, we don't work in a linear fashion. We work on mood and inspiration and stuff like that, right? So having this TMax centric system allows me to quickly switch between which novel I want to work on based on my mood. It's incredibly and it's become almost second nature now. The browser window on the right hand side, that is the point of today's talk, which is knowledge management and building a second brain on Vim. But how it kind of dovetails into this film talk I was talking about is because I essentially used this knowledge management system and a journal within it to capture my thoughts over the process of making this film itself. And that brings me to the point of this talk. The the this day and age requires a certain uh, you know strategy for dealing with information overload. And if you're a mildly curious person and mildly curious about the world around you, you are going to be seeking information and then not realizing how to centralize it in a way that you can retrieve it at a moment's notice, you can refine it over time, and hopefully it allows for a deeper understanding of whatever subject or subjects that you're curious about. So that was the first question that I had to answer. And the second one was, how the heck do I do it efficiently and do it at a moment's notice? And then how do I do all of this without being overwhelmed? So this like trying to answer these questions, one of the things that I came across was the idea of a second brain. Now, I don't know about you guys, I'm an 80s kid, so I grew up with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and for me a second brain was always Krang, right? So for me, in my mind, my little mascot for my second brain is this is basically Krang from the 80s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. But this idea of a second brain is not just something that is that kind of that I was pursuing, because here you can see essentially YouTube. What is this, productivity YouTubers, right? And essentially all of them talking about the need for a second brain, and almost all of them would essentially point towards the same tools: Notion, Obsidian, Athens Research, and such, which were the tools that were popular amongst researchers and people who are constantly learning, constantly learning. So I was going through this idea of a second brain, and I came across this sociologist from, I think he's a German sociologist in the early 20th century, Nicholas Luhmann. And Nicholas Luhmann, amongst many things, was an incredibly prolific public intellectual. Seriously, I encourage you guys to Google his name. And one of the things one of his legacies rather, is the fact that he was an incredibly productive human being, but also an incredibly creative thinker, creative and lucid thinker. And one of the ways that he achieved that was through what he called his Zettelkasten. His Zettelkasten was essentially, I mean, the word Zettelkasten, I think in German means slip box. So this was essentially his knowledge management system that he had built over decades. And I'm talking like, I think 4.5 decades of work is there. Now, when you and I look at it, what we see is analog chaos, right? There seems to be no order, there seems to be no organization, there seems to be no sense of retrievability or a thread of thought connecting these various pieces of paper to one another. But the thing here that we have to understand is we have to see how Nicholas Luhmann went about doing this. Now, this is a very high level idea of his Zettelkasten. Immediately, what is apparent here is each of these rectangular silos, shall we call it, are subjects, are individual subject domains in themselves. And the hierarchy, the information hierarchy that you see here, 1A, 1B, 1A1, so on and so forth, is basically a representation of his mind going deeper and deeper and deeper into a certain subject. But when you zoom out, what you notice is all these silos are seemingly disconnected. Now, that isn't how our brains work. Our brains make neuroplasticity involves us making connections between sometimes fairly unrelated subjects, and that is where at least I think creativity is born. And this is where Luhmann's system was genius, because what he allowed for is the interconnectability or the pollination pollination between these various subjects. So you can see how certain indexes here, 1A1 connects to 3B, 2B connects back to to 1A1. What you're seeing right now, so if you revisit this image from earlier, what you're seeing right now is not disorganized chaos. What you're seeing is analog hypertext, right? And it's basically an analog Wikipedia of his mind. And that was for me, that was an interesting kind of like conceptual understanding of what a Zettelkasten is, but what potentials a Zettelkasten can have when you are pursuing this idea of a second brain. So the thing is, already there are tools that exist for building your second brain. As I mentioned earlier, if you a cursory search on YouTube will kind of take you through productivity YouTubers and their second brain related videos, and all of those videos will kind of imply or straight out recommend these fairly popular tools. Athens, of course, is fairly lesser known, whereas Obsidian and Notion, I think, are like right now in terms of mind share. That's where those are the two leading apps. The third one over here, this one here is a very interesting little extension on VS Code called I can't recall how it's pronounced, but I think it's called Dedron or Duradon, or some science fiction sounding name. It was interesting, and it involves the same process, or it involves the same conceptual underpinnings as Athens and Obsidian, as well as Notion, which is essentially the interconnectability between nodes. So not a single node isn't left in vacuum. Instead it exists within this like very rich, interconnected framework that is constantly referring to one another, refining each other's understanding of the concepts, and so on and so forth. But we are Vim users, right? We are not satisfied with having to take our workflows out of Vim. So that is how I kind of ended up using a bunch of plugins. I will go into the details of the plugins itself, but essentially using a bunch of plugins, I ended up building a second brain on Vim. These plugins were Vim-wiki, Vim-wiki server, and I think there is a specific NeoVim counterpart called Vim-wiki.nvim. Unfortunately, right now for me, this only works on Vim. So the rest of this talk is just going to specifically focus on my Zettelkasten built on Vim and not NeoVim. I just want to make that clear. But before I go into the demo, I just want to show you guys the video. I put this up a few months ago. This is essentially my Zettelkasten. Now this is done on the phone. Again, like I have random subjects here, right? I have my like I enjoy cooking, so I have my recipes here. I have notes related to my writing here. I have notes related to stuff that I'm learning. Like I'm doing a little bit of hobbyist coding, as I mentioned last year. Especially, I think Python has applicability and relevance for people outside of programming, especially in the humanities, as well as writers such as myself. I think Chris would also agree, the previous speaker. So essentially, I'm trying to teach myself a little bit of Python, and sometimes because I am on Linux, I do have recurring technical issues, and it's always nice to be able to, instead of googling away, I end up throwing all these like tech support solutions that I've come for Vim also, but also for Linux related stuff, especially when it comes to the NVIDIA card, right? Sometimes it doesn't really play well, so I tend to like get the information that works and then store it in my Zettelkasten, so that I can essentially go back to it as soon as I can, or as soon as the problem kind of recurs. So before I go into the demo, these are my socials. I'm just going to leave that there, and I'm going to switch to the Zettelkasten itself. So a couple of notes here. I'm not going to explain how a Zettelkasten works conceptually, but at a very high level, there are two kinds of nodes. There are short-term nodes and there are long-term nodes. The short-term nodes go into something called an inbox, and you will notice that I have an inbox here, right? There you go. you will notice I have an inbox here, and that inbox is where, as I've put a note for myself, it's basically where your brain farts go in there, right? So if I, as a writer, if I have some dumb idea for a story, I would first throw it in there, and then I would start using that to refine it over time, and finally, once it's refined, it will end up in my long-term notes. But this note keeping is more relevant for the act of learning, as opposed to constantly learning, as opposed to my writing stuff. But I'm going to show you both sides of it. I'm going to show you my workflow where I use this for my writing, but I also will show you how I've used this for the film, as I mentioned earlier. The long-term notes, of course, is where I am I'm doing a little bit of computer science just to keep myself busy. There's stuff to do with my startup. Like I said, there are recipes here. There's all sorts of stuff here that basically are to do with my curiosities. We'll call it that. So to start off, let me just show you what the inbox looks like. So the inbox, let's just go into the writing ideas. So writing ideas, I essentially have, I essentially use this as a springboard for different kinds of writing. So if I was working on a book, there is stuff here. This is to do with my film. I think I'm not going to show you the earlier ones because not that one. No, sorry, this one. Right. Okay. So no, this is not the one. All right. This is the film that I'm working on right now, and you will notice with the timelines, it's basically tracing where the movie started. Around March 15th is the day before we started principal photography, and over time you can see how I've kind of refined the film, and allowed myself to be able to recall what a certain thought process was at a, and then be able to recall it and see if it's worth revisiting in the context of editing the film itself. So this was essentially the three-act structure of the film. And I was able to kind of come down to a point where I was able to settle on a I just lost my train of thought. But essentially, I used this in order to make sure I was capturing my brain's thought process around this film. Now, one of the things that I also used was, now this is where the whole interconnectability and the fact that the notes are not left in isolation or in vacuum. So this is a section on cinema. So if I was to go into this section, I am also essentially teaching myself a little bit of film theory as well, like just not teaching myself, but ensuring that I remember certain things. So I was, on 28th of April, there's a little note I kept for myself. I think I need to remember to let the film breathe. The audio edits that I did is more appropriate for the start. And, this way I was able to capture my thought process over time. So essentially it becomes a production diary of sorts. You can, these are notes that I left for my music director. I wanted to give him references as to what kind of mood and what is this vibe that I wanted to go for each act. So essentially, Act One is, if you guys are fans of Black Star, the collaboration between Talib Kweli and Mos Def, that was the reference that I gave for Act One. Act Two was based on Nine Inch Nails. Act Three on Rage Against the Machine, and Act Three, the end part was Hamilton Part One. So when I gave these references, as soon as I thought of these references, I basically put them here, and I was able to share these notes with my music director, so that he knew where I wanted the film to go in terms of its sound design and its music. In terms of editing, here I've basically shown myself what things that I needed to remember myself to remind myself rather on what it is that I'm doing, just in terms of workflow. But now you are going to ask me okay, does this mean you're just going to be clicking away and where's the speed of where's the speed here? And that's where Rip Grep comes in. So if I were to go and say parlor doc, let's say editing. inbox. Editing inbox. I have this. Walter Merck. Okay, so Walter Merck is my favorite editor. It's not there. All right. Sorry about this, guys. I think I have some notes here. Right. Okay, so these are the notes that I would keep for myself. So if I was to go back into the home page, this is the home page, as it were, right? So at this point, I can essentially start. I can come to the home page and I can start working my way through various parts of the film. So cinema, find structure. So I have essentially fuzzy search as well. I have a little what's this? I have fuzzy search here. I also have the ability to quickly recall stuff based on what it is I'm thinking about. Now that's to do with the film itself, but I can also take this for my writing. Say, for example, I'm working on this thing called yeah, this is the thing. This is a short story I'm working on called 9 Nights in Nallur. Nallur is a small city in Sri Lanka. When I got the idea for the story, this is where I basically dumped it. And once I dumped it, I was able to refine this over time, and that refinement is right now here. This is essentially the story that you saw on the Zettel, but being written on LaTeX. On LaTeX for there we go. Okay, B. If you can see this, yeah. So it started from the Zetter Castle, and then essentially it moved its way to NeoVim, where I wrote the entire thing on LaTeX. And honestly, writing on LaTeX has been an absolute dream here, right? Because it's just been it even gives me a sense of what the book will look like in a way that Microsoft Word doesn't. The formatting looks nicer. It's just very pretty to look at. It's give me a second. Right. So that's LaTeX. If you go back to my Zettel, I was saying that I was working on a couple of books, right? So this is the other book that I'm working on. You can see this is a little more involved because the earlier one is a short story. This is an actual full-blown novel. I have characters here. I have story ideas, the structure. Everything is down on paper. And once again, because I'm even though I'm not a musician, I like to have musical references when I'm writing or editing, and sometimes that helps me to orient myself in terms of emotion and mood and vibe that I want to hit, right? So this is a coming of age story based in the early 90s or late 90s / early 2000s, and a lot of the music here is the music that we kind of grew up on at that point in time. So essentially, this is all here. Now, this is all well and good, right? It's all well and good, but what happens when I want to be able to just be able to click through it in a more browser-based environment? So there, I have hosted this site using. I'm just going to put this on dark mode so that it's a lot more pleasant for you guys. Right. So the Vim-wiki or the Zetter Castle that you saw earlier, I basically can. Okay, so it says Vim-wiki to HTML. Essentially, expose the entire thing to a website that I host on my local network, and the entire thing is easily recoverable, right? So I can just be like, okay, inbox. The same thing that you saw earlier will be a lot easier to read now. So let's see. Okay, yeah. So this is the film I was talking about. Then in terms of the short stories, where am I? Okay, 4 short stories. Yes, so these are short stories that I'm working on. I think I mentioned last time that I was working on an idea called open stories, where essentially the manuscripts would be put under Creative Commons 4.0. These are those manuscripts that I'm working on. These are short stories, and I hope to be able to like put it out on GitHub so that any one of you can take those stories and take ownership over the stories. These are the stories that I'm working on. The 10 Commands is a dystopian story based on it's almost like a biblical story where a Moses-like character comes across a tablet, but the tablet is running a Unix-like OS, and it's through interacting with that Unix-like OS that the 10 commands to revive humanity are received. So it's a story that's currently work in progress. What else is there? Okay, so this is the LaTeX document that I showed you earlier. Again, this was the first writing of it, and from that writing, I was able to develop it. Sorry, that's not done. There's a lot of, I do work on a lot of poetry. I'm not going to show you poetry because that's a little empty for the time for the audience, but yeah, so that's there as well. So that's pretty much it, I think, unless there's anything that I've forgotten. This is, yeah, everything is essentially here for me to browse and get lost in the same way that we can get lost in when it comes to Wikipedia. And like one of the things that I wanted to go for is, there's this meme that XKCD did where you start off Wikipedia in one subject and you end up in some completely unrelated subject 5 hours later. And it's because you're just clicking through, humanity's second brain. Like Wikipedia, I think of Wikipedia as its second, as humanity's collective understanding of our world around us, right? And when you go into Wikipedia, there is this very pleasant danger of kind of getting lost because you're just clicking through and you just completely lose track of time and so on and so forth. That is what I've basically been able to recreate in the last like 6-7 months. This is 6-7 months worth of work while I was working on the film as well. I think over time, in the next 10-15 years, I know I'm going to be using this for the next 10-15 years. I will be able to recall stuff that I'm thinking about now and refine it later on. In many ways, that is how I kind of write as well, because there are certain stories that are kept in gestation mode for years before I'm able to kind of recover it. Now the system is that now there is a system. There wasn't a system before. It was just basically me writing myself a note and emailing it. That's no longer the case. Now all these writing ideas I can vomit out into this into my Zetter Castle, and it's available as a little website for my own. I can access it at any point. Like I can access it when I'm traveling around. If I want to like revisit it, I can quickly edit, refine the notes over my phone itself. And I know when I come back home and I just and I export the note, that note will fall into the my Zetter Castle, and this is essentially the home page. So that's pretty much it. I'm done. I'll be happy to take questions.